The snow had stopped falling, but the forest was a labyrinth of white, each tree cloaked in a heavy shroud that muffled the world. Elara trudged forward, her boots sinking into the drifts, her breath puffing out in sharp, frosty clouds. Her fingers, numb despite the gloves, clutched the small hunting knife she'd grabbed from her cabin before fleeing. The weight of it was a frail comfort against the memory of the beast, its glowing amber eyes, its snarl that had vibrated through her bones. She didn't know what it was, only that it wasn't just a wolf. And it had been watching her. Her heart still raced from the encounter at the ravine. The creature had lunged, not at her, but at something or someone else in the shadows. She'd heard a second growl, lower, more menacing, before she'd bolted. Now, miles from her cabin, she was lost, cold, and haunted by the question of what she'd seen. Her life in Blackthorn Hollow was supposed to be a quiet escape from the wreckage of her past, a cheating fiancé, a family that had turned their backs when she refused to play their perfect daughter. But this forest, this place, was anything but quiet. A twig snapped behind her, sharp and deliberate. Elara froze, her knife raised, her pulse hammering in her throat. The wind carried a scent earthy, musky, like pine and something wilder, like fur warmed by a fire. She turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the endless white and the faint creak of branches under snow. She exhaled, lowering the knife, but her nerves screamed to keep moving. That's when she saw him. He was slumped against a gnarled oak, half hidden by a snowbank, his broad frame hunched as if he'd collapsed there. Dark hair fell over his face, streaked with frost, and his leather jacket was torn at the shoulder, revealing a glimpse of blood-soaked fabric beneath. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a labored rasp. Elara's first instinct was to run. Strangers in these woods were rare, and dangerous ones weren't unheard of. But something held her. His face, even shadowed, was etched with pain, and his hands, curled loosely in the snow, were empty. No weapon, no threat. "Hey," she called softly, her voice trembling in the cold air. "Are you okay?" He didn't move. She edged closer, her boots crunching, her knife still gripped tightly. Up close, he was massive, broad-shouldered, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, though it was softened by a faint scruff. His eyes were closed, but his brows were furrowed, as if he were fighting something even in his half-conscious state. Blood stained the snow beneath him, a stark crimson against the white. Her stomach twisted. He wasn't just hurt, he was bleeding out. Elara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering, unsure where to start. "Hey, can you hear me? You're hurt. I can help." She wasn't sure she could. Not out here with no supplies, no signal, and no idea where she was. But she couldn't leave him. Not like this. His eyes fluttered open, and she froze. They were amber, the same burning gold as the creature in the ravine. Her breath caught, but before she could process it, his gaze softened, unfocused, and he muttered something too low to catch. His head lolled to the side, and she realized he was slipping away. No, stay with me," she said, her voice sharper now. She yanked off her scarf, pressing it to the gash on his shoulder. The fabric soaked through almost instantly, warm and sticky against her gloves. "Come on, big guy. Don't die on me out here." His hand twitched, then closed weakly around her wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong, and his skin was fever-hot even through her glove. "Not safe," he rasped, his voice deep, rough, like gravel dragged over stone. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," she shot back, her fear giving way to a stubborn spark. "But here we are. Can you stand? I need to get you somewhere warm." He didn't answer, but his eyes locked on hers, clearer now, searching. There was something in that look, wild, guarded, but not hostile. It was like he was seeing her, really seeing her, and it made her skin prickle in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She shook it off, focusing on the task. "I'm Elara," she said, tying the scarf tighter around his wound. "What's your name?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Kael," he said finally, the word clipped, like it cost him something to give it. "Okay, Kael. We're not far from my cabin if I can find it. Can you walk?" She stood, offering her hand, though she wasn't sure she could support his weight. He was easily over 6 feet, built like a man who could break logs with his bare hands. Kael grunted, pushing himself up with a wince. He swayed, and she ducked under his good arm, letting him lean on her. He was heavy, his body radiating heat despite the blood loss, and that musky scent was stronger now, dizzying. You're stubborn, he muttered, his voice low, almost amused. Says the guy bleeding in the middle of nowhere, she retorted, guiding him forward. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Every rustle made her jump, her mind flashing back to those amber eyes in the ravine. She glanced at Kael, his face pale but set, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The trek back to her cabin was slow, agonizing. Kael's steps were unsteady, but he didn't complain, his focus fixed on the path ahead. Elara's mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask yet. Who was he? Why was he out here, wounded, alone? And those eyes, had she imagined the resemblance to the creature? She pushed the thought down, focusing on the faint outline of her cabin through the trees. When they reached the small, weathered structure, she kicked the door open and helped Kael inside. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, but the room was still warmer than the biting cold outside. She eased him onto the couch, ignoring the blood that smeared across the cushions. Stay here, she said, grabbing her first aid kit from the kitchen. Her hands shook as she rummaged through it, bandages, antiseptic, a needle and thread. She wasn't a doctor, but she'd patched herself up enough times to know the basics. Kael watched her, his gaze too sharp for someone who'd lost so much blood. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice softer now, almost reluctant. You don't know me. Yeah. Well, I'm not in the habit of letting people die, she said, kneeling beside him. She peeled back his torn jacket, revealing a deep gash across his shoulder, claw-like marks that looked too precise to be accidental. Her breath hitched. What did this to you? He didn't answer, his jaw clenching as she cleaned the wound. The silence was heavy, charged, and she could feel his eyes on her, tracking every move. You're not from around here, he said finally, not a question. Moved here a month ago, she said, keeping her tone light despite the tension. Needed a fresh start. You? Born here, he said, his voice tight as she threaded the needle. Never left. She paused, the needle hovering. You don't sound thrilled about it. He didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. She focused on stitching, her hands steadier now, though her heart still pounded. His skin was warm to warm, and the muscle beneath was taut, like he was holding himself together through sheer will. When she finished, she taped a bandage over the stitches and sat back, wiping her hands on her jeans. You're good at this, he said, his voice low, almost grudging. Practice, she said, meeting his eyes. That amber gaze held her again, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them, the crackle of the fire, the weight of unspoken questions. She wanted to ask about the creature, about the blood, about why he was out here alone. But something in his expression, a flicker of wariness, stopped her. Rest, she said instead, standing. I'll make some tea. Then you can tell me why you're running around in a blizzard getting clawed to pieces. He didn't answer, but his eyes followed her as she moved to the kitchen, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a touch. Outside, the wind howled, and in the distance, a low, guttural sound echoed through the trees, a sound that wasn't quite a wolf's howl, but something older, wilder. Elara's hand tightened on the kettle, and she knew, deep down, that whatever she'd stumbled into wasn't over. Chapter 3. Suspicion and curiosity. Cabin was a cocoon of warmth against the howling wind outside, but the air inside crackled with unspoken tension. Elara stood at the stove, the kettle's soft whistle cutting through the silence as she poured steaming water into 2 chipped mugs. Her hands moved on autopilot, but her mind churned with questions about the man on her couch. Kael. His name felt heavy, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through her thoughts. Those amber eyes, the claw marks on his shoulder, the way he'd warned her it wasn't safe. They gnawed at her, each piece a fragment of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. She glanced over her shoulder. Kael sat upright now, his broad frame dominating the small couch, his gaze fixed on the fire she'd stoked back to life. The bandage on his shoulder was already stained with fresh blood, but he didn't seem to notice. His hands rested on his knees, fingers flexing slightly, as if he were fighting some inner battle to stay still. There was a wildness to him, even in this quiet moment, a coiled energy that made the room feel smaller, charged. Here, she said, crossing the room to hand him a mug of chamomile tea. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, and a jolt ran through her, sharp and unbidden. His skin was still too warm, almost feverish, and she pulled her hand back quickly, covering the motion by settling into the armchair across from him. Thanks, he said, his voice low, rough, like he wasn't used to gratitude. He didn't drink, just held the mug, his eyes flicking to hers before dropping back to the fire. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Elara sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her. She wanted to demand answers: who he was, what had attacked him, why he'd been out there alone, but his guarded posture, the way his jaw tightened when she looked at him too long, told her he wouldn't give them easily. So she started small. "You said you were born here," she said, keeping her tone casual. "In Blackthorn Hollow?" He nodded, barely. "Near it. The forest." She raised an eyebrow. "People live in the forest? I thought it was just trees and bears." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "There and gone. More than that out there. Always has been." His words hung in the air, cryptic, deliberate. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Like what? Wolves?" She watched him closely, searching for a reaction. His fingers tightened around the mug, but his face stayed impassive. "Wolves, other things." He met her gaze then, and those amber eyes seemed to burn, pinning her in place. "Things you don't want to run into at night." Her pulse quickened, not just from fear but from the intensity of his stare. It was like he was testing her, gauging how much she could handle. She thought of the creature in the ravine, its eyes so like his, and a chill skittered down her spine. "I saw something tonight," she said, her voice quieter now, testing him back. "Before I found you." "It wasn't a wolf." "Not exactly." Kael's expression didn't change, but his shoulders stiffened, a subtle shift she might have missed if she weren't watching so closely. "What did you see?" His tone was even, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden in silk. She hesitated, the memory vivid: those eyes, that snarl, the way it had moved, too fast, too deliberate. It was big, fast, had eyes like. She stopped, her gaze flicking to his. "Like yours." He didn't flinch, but the air seemed to thicken, the fire's crackle suddenly too loud. For a moment, she thought he'd deny it, brush it off, but he just leaned back, his jaw working. "You're imagining things," he said finally, but the words lacked conviction, and his eyes didn't leave hers. "Am I?" She pressed, her voice soft but firm. "You're out here, bleeding from claw marks, half dead in a blizzard. And you're telling me I'm imagining things?" He set the mug down on the side table, the movement deliberate, controlled. "You don't know this place, Elara." "Not yet. There's things in these woods that don't make sense too. People like you." "People like me?" She bristled, the words stinging more than they should. "What's that supposed to mean?" He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze stripping away her defenses. "City girl, running from something. Thinking a cabin in the middle of nowhere will fix it." His voice was low, not cruel but piercing, like he'd seen straight through her. Her cheeks burned, and she stood, crossing her arms. "You don't know me either," she snapped. "So don't pretend you do." For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension a living thing between them. Then Kael's expression softened, just a fraction, and he rubbed a hand over his face, wincing as the motion tugged at his wound. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "I don't, but you're here, patching me up, asking questions. That's more than most would do." The admission caught her off guard, disarming her anger. She sank back into the chair, her hands twisting in her lap. "I couldn't leave you out there," she said, almost to herself. "Not after everything." He tilted his head, studying her. "Everything?" She didn't answer right away. The weight of her past, her fianki's betrayal, her family's cold dismissal pressed against her chest, but she wasn't ready to spill it to a stranger, not even one with eyes that seemed to see too much. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be left bleeding," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something like understanding flicker in his eyes. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Me too." The words hung between them, a fragile bridge over the chasm of their secrets. Outside, the wind howled, and that strange, guttural sound echoed again, closer this time. Elara's head snapped toward the window, her heart lurching. "What was that?" Kael's jaw tightened, and he stood, moving to the window with a grace that belied his injury. He peered out, his body tense, like a predator ready to spring. "Stay here," he said, his voice low, commanding. "Lock the door behind me." "What?" "No." She was on her feet, grabbing his arm. His skin was hot under her fingers, and she felt that same jolt, stronger now. "You're hurt. You can't go out there." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her, his eyes unreadable. "I'll be fine," he said, but there was something in his tone, something that sounded like a lie. Before she could argue, he pulled free and slipped out the door, the cold rushing in as it closed behind him. Elara stood frozen, her heart pounding. The cabin felt too quiet without him, the fire's warmth no match for the chill creeping through her. She moved to the window, peering into the dark, but the snow obscured everything. Her mind raced those eyes, that sound, the way he'd moved. He wasn't just a man, was he? The thought sent a shiver through her, not just fear, but something else. Something that pulled at her like a tide. She locked the door, her hands trembling, and sank onto the couch, his mug still warm where he'd left it. Whatever Kael was hiding, whatever was out there in the woods, she was in too deep to turn back now. Chapter 4. Building trust. The cabin was too quiet without Kael, the silence pressing against Elara like a weight. She sat on the couch, clutching the mug he'd left behind, its fading warmth a reminder of his presence. The fire crackled, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled in her bones, not from the cold, but from the uncertainty. That guttural howl, the way Kael had moved toward it with such purpose, the secrets he carried in those amber eyes, it all swirled in her mind, a storm of questions with no answers. She glanced at the locked door, her pulse quickening. What was he doing out there? And why did she feel like her world had shifted the moment he'd walked into it? Minutes dragged by, each one stretching her nerves tighter. She stood, pacing to the window, but the snow was a white veil, hiding everything beyond the glass. Her fingers tightened on the curtain, her breath fogging the pain. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the thought of that creature out there or the fact that Kael had gone to face it, wounded and alone. She should have stopped him, should have demanded answers before he slipped into the dark. But there was something about him, a quiet strength, a guarded pain that made her want to trust him, even when logic screamed otherwise. The door rattled, and she spun, her heart leaping to her throat. The handle turned, and Kael stepped inside, snow dusting his dark hair and jacket. His face was pale, his jaw set, but his eyes were alive, burning with that same wild intensity. Blood seeped through the bandage on his shoulder, darker now, and his breathing was uneven. But he stood tall, like the pain was an afterthought. "You're back," Elara said, her voice shakier than she wanted. She crossed her arms, trying to hide her relief. What was out there? Kael shut the door, locking it with a deliberate click. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, his tone clipped, but his gaze softened as it met hers. "Not tonight." "That's not an answer," she said, stepping closer, her frustration bubbling up. "You run out into a blizzard, bleeding after some thing makes a noise that sounds like it wants to eat us, and you expect me to just nod and move on?" He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement breaking through his guarded expression. "You're not good at letting things go, are you?" "Not when they don't make sense," she shot back, but her voice softened. "You're hurt, Kael. You could have died out there. Why won't you tell me what's going on?" He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, like he was weighing how much truth she could handle. "It's complicated," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. "And it's not my story to tell. Not all of it." She opened her mouth to argue, but the weariness in his posture stopped her. He sank onto the couch, wincing as he leaned back, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion etched into his features. Not just physical, something deeper, like a wound that went beyond the claw marks. She knew that kind of weight. She'd carried it for months, running from a life that had shattered her. Elara sat beside him, leaving a careful distance. "Okay," she said quietly. "You don't have to tell me everything, but just tell me something, anything, so I don't feel like I'm losing my mind." He looked at her, his gaze steady, and for a moment, she thought he'd brush her off again. But then he exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. "I've been out here a long time," he said, his voice rough. "Longer than I wanted. This place, the forest, it's not just trees and bears, like you said. It's older. There are things here that don't follow the rules, you know." She leaned forward, her curiosity overriding her fear. "Like what? That thing I saw? The one that attacked you?" He didn't answer directly, his eyes flicking to the fire. "There's a balance," he said instead, "between what's wild and what's not. I'm caught in it. Always have been." The words were vague, but the weight behind them wasn't. She heard the loneliness in his voice, the same kind she'd felt when she'd left everything behind to come here. "Caught how?" she asked, her voice gentle. You don't have to give me the whole story, just a piece. Kael's jaw tightened, and he looked at her, his eyes searching again, like he was trying to decide if she was worth the risk. I lost someone, he said finally, the words heavy, like they'd been buried deep. Someone I was supposed to protect. And I've been paying for it ever since. Her chest ached at the rawness in his voice. She knew that kind of guilt, the kind that clung like damp rot. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I know what it's like to lose something you can't get back. He tilted his head, studying her. Your fresh start, he said, not a question. What are you running from, Elara? The question hit like a stone, and she looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap. She hadn't talked about it, not with anyone, not since she'd left the city. But his honesty, however small, tugged at her, loosening the knot in her chest. A fianc who thought promises were optional, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A family who thought I was the problem for not forgiving him. I came here to, I don't know, start over, be someone else. Kael didn't say anything, but his gaze held hers, steady, unguarded for the first time. You're not the problem, he said quietly, the words carrying a conviction that made her breath catch. They were. She swallowed, her throat tight. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said, and the simplicity of it, the certainty, made her heart stutter. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the firelight casting shadows across his face, softening the hard lines. She felt it again, that pull, like a thread tying her to him. Impossible to ignore. Outside, the wind howled, and another sound followed. Fainter now, but still there, a low growl that raised the hairs on her neck. Kael's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing. You need to stay inside, he said, his voice low, urgent. No matter what you hear. What is it? She asked, her voice rising. Kael, tell me. Not now, he said, standing, his hand brushing her shoulder as he moved to the door. The touch lingered, warm and grounding, and she grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Don't go, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Please, whatever's out there, you're not in any shape to face it. His eyes softened, but there was a resolve in them too, something unyielding. I have to, he said, but I'll come back. I promise. He slipped out before she could argue, the door closing with a soft thud. Elara stood, her heart pounding, the cabin suddenly too small to quiet. She moved to the window, peering into the dark, but saw nothing but snow. The growl came again, closer, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that Kael was tied to it, tied to whatever haunted these woods. And somehow, so was she. Chapter 5. Dangerous obstacles. The fire in the cabin had dwindled to glowing embers, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Elara stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass, her fingers pressed against the cold pane as she strained to see into the swirling snow. Kael had been gone too long, for longer than the first time he'd slipped out to face whatever lurked in the forest. The low guttural growl she'd heard earlier had faded, but the silence was worse, heavy with the weight of her imagination. Was he fighting that creature? Was he even alive? The thought twisted her stomach, and she hated how much it mattered. She barely knew him, yet the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. Like a current dragging her towards something she didn't understand, she turned from the window, pacing the small room, her boots scuffing the worn floorboards. The mug of tea sat cold on the table, next to the blood-stained bandages she'd used on Kael's wound. His words echoed in her mind. I lost someone. I've been paying for it ever since. The rawness in his voice had mirrored her own pain, and in that moment, she'd felt a connection, a fragile thread of shared brokenness. But now, with him out there facing God knows what, that thread felt like a lifeline she was desperate to hold onto. A sharp thud against the door snapped her out of her thoughts. She froze, her heart lurching. Kael, she called, her voice trembling. No answer. Another thud, softer this time, like something heavy slumping against the wood. She grabbed the hunting knife from the table, her pulse hammering as she approached the door. Her hand hovered over the lock, every instinct screaming caution, but the thought of Kael, hurt or worse, overrode her fear. She unbolted the door and pulled it open, the cold rushing in like a slap. Kael stood there, one hand braced against the frame, his face pale and streaked with sweat despite the freezing air. His jacket was torn further, fresh blood seeping through the bandage, and his eyes were wild, flickering with something raw and untamed. Behind him, the snow was churned, marked with dark smears that looked too much like blood, Get inside, he rasped, stumbling forward. She caught him, her arms straining under his weight as she guided him to the couch. He collapsed onto it, his breathing ragged, and she knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she checked his wound. The stitches had held, but the gash was weeping, and new scratches marred his forearm. Shallow but angry. What happened? She demanded, grabbing the first aid kit. What did this to you? He shook his head, his jaw clenched. Doesn't matter. It's gone. For now. For now? She tore open a fresh bandage, her frustration spilling over. Kael, you can't keep doing this, running off, coming back half dead, and telling me nothing. I'm not an idiot. I know something's out there, and it's not just a wolf. His eyes met hers, amber and piercing, and for a moment, she thought he'd shut her out again. But then he sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. You're right, he said quietly. It's not just a wolf, but you don't want to know what it is. Not yet. Why not? She pressed, her voice softening as she taped the bandage over his wound. I'm already in this, Kael. I patched you up. I'm hiding you in my cabin. If I'm in danger, I deserve to know why. He leaned back, wincing, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his expression, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. You're not in danger, he said, but the words sounded hollow, like he was trying to convince himself. I won't let anything touch you. The promise hit her hard, stirring something warm and dangerous in her chest. She sat back on her heels, studying him. His face was etched with pain, but there was a fierceness there too, a protectiveness that made her feel safe and unsteady all at once. You don't even know me, she said, echoing her words from earlier. Why do you care? Kael's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. I don't know, he admitted, his voice low, almost a growl. But I do. The air between them thickened, charged with a tension that wasn't just fear or suspicion. Her breath caught, and she looked away, focusing on cleaning the blood from her hands. You're impossible, she muttered, but there was no heat in it. She stood, needing distance, and busied herself stoking the fire. Kael watched her, his silence heavy but not oppressive. You're not what I expected, he said after a moment, his voice softer now. Most people would have run, or asked questions. I couldn't answer. You just keep going. She glanced over her shoulder, a small smile tugging at her lips. Stubborn, remember? He chuckled, a low, rough sound that warmed the room more than the fire. Yeah, I remember. For a moment, they were just two people, sharing a quiet laugh in a world that felt too big, too dangerous. But the moment shattered when another sound cut through the night, not a growl this time, but a sharp, rhythmic howl, joined by another, then a third. It wasn't just one creature out there anymore. Elara's heart sank, and she saw Kael's body tense, his eyes narrowing as he listened. What is that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. Kael stood, slower this time, his hand pressing against his wound. Trouble, he said, his tone grim. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me. No, she said, stepping in front of him. You're not going out there again. You're barely standing. His eyes flashed, a mix of frustration and something softer. Elara, I have to. They're not here for you, but they will be if I don't stop them. Who's they? She demanded, her voice rising. Kael, stop hiding things from me. I can handle it. He hesitated, his hand hovering near her shoulder, as if he wanted to touch her but didn't trust himself. You're braver than you know, he said, his voice rough with something like admiration. But this isn't your fight. Not yet. Before she could argue, he moved past her, his steps steadier than they should have been. He paused at the door, looking back. Lock it, he said, and then he was gone, the cold swallowing him as the door clicked shut. Elara stood frozen, her heart pounding. The howls grew louder, closer, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that whatever was out there was tied to Kael's secrets. And whatever those secrets were, they were about to drag her deeper into his world. Chapter 6. The secret unveiled. The howls outside the cabin grew sharper, a chorus of primal voices that seemed to claw at the walls. Elara stood by the door, her hand still on the lock, Kael's parting words echoing in her mind. Lock it. She did, the bolt sliding home with a heavy thud, but it felt like a flimsy barrier against whatever was out there. Her heart raced, not just from fear but from the frustration of being left in the dark. Kael was out there, wounded, facing a threat he wouldn't explain. And she was stuck here, helpless, with nothing but questions and a growing ache she couldn't name. She paced to the window, peering through the frost-etched glass, but the snow was a blinding curtain, hiding Kael and the source of those eerie howls. Her fingers tightened on the hunting knife she'd grabbed again, its weight a small anchor against the chaos in her mind. She thought of his amber eyes, the claw marks, the way he'd said they're not here for you with such certainty. But why? What was he protecting her from? And why did it feel like he was protecting her from himself too? The fire's glow flickered, casting long shadows that made the cabin feel alive, watchful. She sank onto the couch, her eyes darting to the blood-stained bandages on the table. Kael's blood, the memory of stitching his wound, his fever-hot skin under her hands, sent a shiver through her. There was something about him, something that pulled at her, like a tide she couldn't resist. She'd felt it in his voice, in the way he'd looked at her when he'd said, "I know enough." It wasn't just attraction. It was deeper, like a piece of her recognized him, even if she didn't understand why. A sharp crash outside jolted her upright, the knife raised instinctively. The howls had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the walls. Her breath caught, and she crept to the window, her heart pounding. Through the swirling snow, she saw shapes moving, large, shadowed forms, too big to be ordinary wolves. One lunged, a blur of fur and teeth, and another answered with a snap of jaws. Her stomach twisted. Was Kael out there, caught in that violence? The door rattled hard, and she spun, gripping the knife. "Elara," Kael's voice came through, rough and urgent. "Open the door, now." She fumbled with the lock, yanking the door open. Kael stumbled inside, his jacket shredded, fresh blood dripping from a cut above his eye. He was breathing hard, his face pale, but his eyes burned with that same wild intensity. Behind him, the snow was churned, streaked with dark patches, and the air carried that musky scent, stronger now, mixed with something metallic. "Get back," he said, slamming the door and locking it. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, and for a moment, she thought he'd collapse. But he straightened, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on her. "You okay? Am I okay?" She snapped, her fear boiling into anger. "You're the one bleeding again. What the hell is going on, Kael? What's out there?" He didn't answer right away, his hand pressing against the cut on his forehead, smearing blood across his skin. His silence infuriated her, but the way he looked at her, raw, conflicted, like he was fighting himself, made her pause. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "You're scaring me, not just because of whatever's out there, but because you won't tell me anything. I deserve to know." Kael's jaw tightened, and he took a step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid to get too close. "You're right," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You deserve the truth. But once you know, there's no going back." Her heart stuttered, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. "Tell me." He exhaled, a shuddering sound, and ran a hand through his hair, leaving it streaked with blood. "I'm not like you," he said finally, the words heavy, like they'd been torn from him. "I'm a shifter. A werewolf." The word hit her like a physical blow, and she took a step back, the knife slipping in her grip. "A werewolf," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Her mind flashed to the creature in the ravine, its amber eyes, its impossible speed, and Kael's eyes, so similar, staring at her now. It should have been absurd, impossible, but the pieces clicked together, the claw marks, his strength, the way he moved like a predator. "You're that thing I saw?" He shook his head, his expression pained. "Not that one, but like it. There are others out there. A pack. They're not friendly." She sank onto the couch, her legs unsteady. "A pack," she said, her voice hollow. "And you're part of it?" "Not anymore," he said, his voice rough with something like grief. "I was, a long time ago, but I left, or tried to." "Why?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her shock. "What happened?" He looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "I was their alpha, until I failed them. Someone I loved, she died because I couldn't protect her. The pack turned on me, and I couldn't stay." The rawness in his voice cut through her, and she saw the same guilt she'd carried for so long reflected in his eyes. "So you're out here alone," she said softly. "Fighting them off." He nodded, his gaze returning to hers. "They don't take kindly to deserters, and they don't like humans getting too close to their territory." Her breath caught. "Like me. Like you," he said, his voice softening. "But I won't let them hurt you, Elara. I swear it." The promise was fierce, and the way he said her name sent a shiver through her. She wanted to be angry, to demand more answers, but the vulnerability in his eyes stopped her. He was a werewolf, a creature from stories, yet he was here, bleeding, protecting her. And that pull between them, it was stronger now, like a thread tightening around her heart. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" Kael stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but not threatening. "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "But when I saw you, when you helped me, it felt like something woke up. Something I thought was gone." Her heart pounded, and she stood, closing the distance between them. "I feel it too," she admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I don't understand it, but I do." For a moment, they just stood there, inches apart, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. Then a sharp howl pierced the night, closer than before, and Kael's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing. "They're coming," he said, his voice grim. "And they won't stop until they get what they want." Chapter 7. Betrayal or sacrifice. The howl outside the cabin sliced through the fragile moment. Its raw edge, a warning that shattered the quiet intimacy between Elara and Kael. His words, "they're coming," hung in the air, heavy with a threat Elara could feel in her bones. She stood frozen, inches from him, her heart pounding as his amber eyes flicked to the window, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The firelight cast stark shadows across his face, highlighting the fresh cut above his eye, the blood still wet. He was a werewolf, a fact that should have sent her running. But instead, she felt anchored to him, caught in the pull of something she couldn't name. "Kael," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Who's coming? Your pack?" He didn't answer right away, his gaze locked on the window, as if he could see through the swirling snow to the danger beyond. "Not mine," he said finally, his voice low, rough. "Not anymore. But they know I'm here, and they know about you." Her stomach twisted. "Me? Why do they care about me?" Kael turned to her, his eyes softening for a moment, but there was a storm behind them. "Because you're with me," he said, "and that makes you a target." The words hit her like a blow, but before she could press him, another howl ripped through the night, closer now, joined by a chorus of others. The sound was different, angrier, more insistent, like a pack closing in. Elara's hand tightened on the knife she still held, its blade a cold comfort. "What do they want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael's jaw clenched, and he stepped back, putting distance between them. "Me," he said simply. "They want me to answer for what I did, for leaving, for failing her. Her, the woman he'd lost, the one he'd spoken of with such raw grief." Elara's chest ached, not just for his pain but for the way he was pulling away, shutting her out again. "You can't keep doing this," she said, stepping toward him. "Running out there, fighting alone. Let me help you." His eyes flashed, a mix of frustration and something softer, something that made her heart skip. "You can't," he said, his voice rough. "This isn't your world, Elara. You don't know what they're capable of. And you do?" She shot back, her fear giving way to defiance. "You're barely standing, Kael. You're hurt, and you're not invincible, no matter what you are." He flinched, as if her words had struck deeper than she'd meant. For a moment, he just looked at her, his gaze searching, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You don't get it," he said quietly. "If I stay, if they find you with me, they won't stop at me." The weight of his words settled over her, cold and heavy. He was trying to protect her, she realized, but it felt like he was pushing her away, sacrificing himself to keep her safe. The thought made her throat tighten, and she reached out, grabbing his wrist. His skin was hot, his pulse strong under her fingers, and that pull between them flared, sharp and undeniable. "Don't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't decide for me. I'm not some fragile thing you need to shield." Kael's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, his hand hovering near her cheek before dropping. "You're not fragile," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "But you're human." "And they're not." The howls grew louder, a cacophony that seemed to shake the cabin's walls. Elara's heart pounded, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. "Then tell me how to help," she said. "If I'm in this, I'm in it, all the way." For a moment, she thought he'd argue, but then his shoulders sagged, and he nodded, a reluctant surrender. "There's a ritual," he said, his voice tight. "A blood mark. It's old magic, tied to the pack's bond. If I mark you, they'll know you're under my protection." They might leave you alone. Her breath caught. A blood mark? What does that mean? He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. It's a bond, he said. Not just protection. It ties us. You'd feel me, and I'd feel you. Always. The words sent a shiver through her, not just from fear but from the intensity of what he was offering. A bond. Something permanent. Something that went beyond the physical. She should have been terrified, but the thought of being tied to Kael, of carrying a piece of him with her, felt right in a way she couldn't explain. Do it, she said, her voice steady. Kael's eyes widened, like he hadn't expected her to agree. Elara, you don't know what I know enough, she said, cutting him off. You said it yourself. I'm in this. So do it. He stared at her, his expression a mix of awe and fear, and then he nodded. He pulled a small knife from his belt, its blade glinting in the firelight. This will hurt, he warned, his voice soft. I can handle it, she said, holding out her hand. He took it, his touch gentle despite the strength in his grip. He sliced his own palm first, a quick, shallow cut, and blood welled up, dark and glistening. Then, with a gentleness that made her heart ache, he cut her palm, the sting sharp but fleeting. He pressed their hands together, their blood mingling, and whispered words she didn't understand, low, guttural, like a chant from another time. Warmth spread through her, starting at her hand and radiating outward, like a fire igniting in her veins. She gasped, her eyes locking on his, and for a moment, she felt him, his strength, his pain, his resolve like a heartbeat echoing her own. It's done, he said, his voice rough, his hand still holding hers. You're marked? They'll know, she nodded, her throat tight, the warmth of the bond lingering. But before she could speak, a crash shattered the moment. A window at the back of the cabin exploded inward, glass scattering across the floor. A massive shape loomed outside, eyes glowing in the dark. And Kael shoved her behind him, his body tense, ready to fight. Stay back, he growled. But the bond pulls between them, and Elara knew, with a clarity that terrified her, that running wasn't an option anymore. Chapter 8. Emotional breakthrough. The shattered window let in a blast of icy air, carrying the scent of pine and something feral, musky, wild, and dangerous. Elara's heart pounded as she crouched behind Kael, the hunting knife trembling in her grip. The glowing eyes outside the cabin burned through the dark, unblinking, and the low growl that followed vibrated in her chest. The blood mark on her palm throbbed, a warm pulse that tethered her to Kael, his presence a steady anchor despite the chaos. She felt him through the bond, his tension, his resolve, and something deeper. A flicker of fear, not for himself but for her. Kael, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind howling through the broken window. What do we do? He didn't turn, his broad frame a shield between her and the threat. Stay behind me, he said, his voice low, commanding. Don't move. The growl outside grew louder, joined by another, then a third. Shadows moved in the snow, their forms massive, too large for ordinary wolves. Elara's mind raced, piecing together Kael's revelation. He was a werewolf, an alpha cast out by his pack. These creatures, these shifters, were here for him. And now, because of the blood mark, they were here for her too. A massive shape lunged through the window, glass crunching under its weight. It was a wolf, but not like any she'd seen. Its fur was midnight black, its eyes a searing red, and its size was monstrous, dwarfing the room. Kael moved faster than she could track, meeting the beast mid-air with a snarl that wasn't human. They collided, a blur of muscle and fury, and the cabin shook as they crashed into the wall. Elara scrambled back, her knife raised, her pulse hammering. She wanted to help, but the bond pulsed with Kael's urgency. Stay back, stay safe. Another wolf burst through the window, its jaws snapping, and Elara's fear turned to instinct. She lunged forward, slashing at its flank with the knife. The blade bit into fur, drawing a yelp, but the creature turned on her, its red eyes locking onto hers. Before it could strike, Kael was there, his hands now clawed, impossibly sharp, tearing into the wolf's side. It howled, retreating, but not before its claws raked across Kael's chest, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood. Kael, Elara screamed, dropping the knife as she rushed to him. He staggered, blood dripping onto the floor, but he pushed her back, his eyes blazing amber. I told you to stay back, he growled, but there was no anger in it, only desperation. The bond flared, and she felt his pain, sharp and searing, mingling with her own fear. The wolves retreated, their howls fading into the storm, but the damage was done. The cabin was a wreck, glass strewn across the floor, furniture overturned, blood staining the wood. Kael sank to his knees, his breathing ragged, and Elara dropped beside him, her hands hovering over the fresh wounds on his chest. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me know," he said, catching her wrist. His grip was gentle but firm, his skin burning against hers. "I'll heal. You need to get out of here. They'll come back. I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. "Not after that. Not after this." She held up her palm, the blood mark still warm, a reminder of the bond they'd forged. "You said we're tied now. That means I'm in this, Kael, all the way." His eyes searched hers, and for the first time, she saw the walls he'd built around himself crumble. "Elara," he said, his voice raw, "you don't know what you're signing up for. This world, it's not just danger. It's pain, loss. I can't let you don't get to decide that." She cut in, her hand cupping his face, heedless of the blood on his skin. "I've been running my whole life from people who hurt me, from a world that didn't want me. I'm done running. I'm here, with you, and I'm not going anywhere." The bond pulsed, a warm current that carried his emotions, fear, guilt, and something softer, something that made her heart ache. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment, and when he opened them, they were softer, unguarded. "You're braver than I am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been running too, from them, from myself." She swallowed, her throat tight. "Then stop," she said. "Stop running. Let me in." For a moment, they were still, the world narrowing to the space between them. The bond hummed, a living thing, and she felt him, his strength, his pain, the weight of his past. And she knew he felt her, too, her fear, her resolve, the scars she carried from a life that had broken her. It was terrifying, exhilarating, to be so exposed, but it was also right, like a piece of her had been missing until now. Kael's hand covered hers, his thumb brushing her palm where the blood mark lay. "I don't deserve this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want it. You." Her breath caught, and before she could think, she leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. "Then take it," she whispered. "Take me." The air between them crackled, charged with a need that went beyond words. But before they could cross that line, a sharp howl split the night, closer than before. Kael tensed, pulling back, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the shattered window. "They're not done," he said, his voice grim. "They'll keep coming until they have what they want." "And what's that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "Me," he said, standing, his wounds already healing, though the blood remained. "And now you. The market protects you, but it also ties you to me. They'll see it as a challenge." Elara stood, her hand finding his. "Then we face them together," she said, the bond pulsing with her determination. "No more running. For either of us." Kael looked at her, his eyes burning with something fierce, something that looked like hope. "Together," he agreed, and the word felt like a vow, but outside. The howls grew. Chapter 9. Love reveled. The howls outside the cabin were a relentless chorus, each one sharper, closer, as if the pack was circling, tightening their noose. Elara stood beside Kael, her hand still in his, the blood mark on her palm pulsing like a second heartbeat. The bond between them hummed, a vibrant thread weaving their emotions together, her fear, his resolve, and something deeper, a longing that had grown with every shared glance, every touch. The air in the wrecked cabin was thick with the scent of blood and pine, the shattered window letting in gusts of snow that stung her skin. But it was Kael's presence, solid, warm, unyielding, that kept her grounded. He turned to her, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, and for a moment, the world outside faded. "Together," he repeated, his voice low, a vow that carried the weight of everything they'd been through. The words settled in her chest, warming her despite the cold. She squeezed his hand, the bond flaring, and felt his strength, his pain, and a flicker of something new. "Hope. We need to move," Kael said, breaking the moment, his gaze flicking to the window. "They're too close. The cabin's not safe anymore." Elara nodded, her heart racing. "Where do we go?" "There's a place," he said, his voice tight. "A clearing not far. It's sacred to the pack, old magic. They won't cross its boundaries, not without a fight. We can make a stand there." She swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. A stand, against a pack of werewolves. A week ago, she'd been alone in this cabin, trying to outrun her past. Now she was bound to a shifter, facing a world she barely understood. But the bond, that impossible pull, made it feel like she'd been waiting for this for him all along. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Lead the way." Kael grabbed a blanket from the couch, draping it over her shoulders against the cold. His fingers lingered, brushing her arm, and the touch sent a shiver through her, not from fear but from the intensity of the bond. "Stay close," he said, his voice soft but firm. "No matter what happens." She nodded, grabbing her knife and a flashlight from the table. Kael pushed the door open, and they stepped into the storm, the wind biting at her face. The forest was a maze of white, the trees looming like silent giants, their branches heavy with snow. The howls followed them, a chilling reminder of the pack closing in. Kael moved with purpose, his steps sure despite his wounds. And Elara stayed close, her hand brushing his as they navigated the dark. The bond pulsed, and she felt his emotions, fear for her safety, guilt for dragging her into this, and something deeper, a fierce protectiveness that made her heart ache. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid, that she chose this, chose him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she reached for his hand again, lacing her fingers through his. He glanced at her, his eyes softening, and for a moment, the storm seemed to fade, the world narrowing to just them. "You're not what I expected either," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I thought I came here to be alone, but now, I don't want to be." Kael stopped, turning to face her, his expression raw, unguarded. The snow swirled around them, catching in his dark hair, and the bond flared, carrying his emotions, pain, longing, and a love so fierce it stole her breath. "Elara," he said, his voice rough, "you don't know what you're saying. This life, my life, it's not safe. It's not fair to you." "I don't care," she said, stepping closer, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "I've spent my life doing what's safe, what's expected. And it broke me. You make me feel alive, like I'm not just surviving." His eyes searched hers, and she saw the battle within him, the alpha who'd lost everything, the man who wanted to protect her, even from himself. "You're my mate," he said, the words spilling out like a confession. "I knew it the moment I saw you. The bond, it's not just protection, it's fate. And I've been fighting it because I don't deserve you." Her heart stopped, the weight of his words sinking in. Mate, fate, the bond pulsed, confirming what she'd felt all along. That pull, that need, wasn't just chance. It was something ancient, something bigger than both of them. "You don't get to decide what you deserve," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I feel it too, Kael. I don't know how, but I do. And I'm not letting you push me away." He reached for her, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I love you," he said, the words raw, unguarded. "And it scares the hell out of me." She leaned into his touch, her eyes stinging with tears. "I love you too," she whispered, and the bond sang, a warmth that spread through her, chasing away the cold. She stood on her toes, closing the distance, and their lips met in a kiss that was desperate, fierce, a promise forged in the heart of the storm. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and for a moment, the world was just them. The bond, a fire that burned away everything else. A sharp howl shattered the moment. Closer than before, and Kael pulled back, his eyes blazing. "We're almost there," he said, his voice urgent. "The clearing's just ahead." They ran, hand in hand, the snow stinging their faces as the howls grew louder, more insistent. The trees parted, revealing a wide clearing, its edges marked by ancient stones carved with symbols Elara didn't recognize. The air here felt different, charged, heavy with a power that made her skin prickle. Kael stopped at the center, his body tense, his eyes scanning the trees. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. "And they're not alone." As the shadows moved closer, their eyes glowing red in the dark, Elara realized the fight for their lives and their love was just beginning. Louder, and Elara knew the fight was far from over. Chapter 10. Final Shalengith clearing was a frozen circle of moonlight, the ancient stones at its edges glowing faintly under the snow-dusted sky. Elara stood beside Kael, her hand still warm from his, the bond between them pulsing like a living flame. The confession of their love, sealed with that desperate kiss, lingered in her chest, a fire that burned against the icy fear creeping through her. The howls had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. Red eyes glowed from the tree line, circling, watching. And Elara knew the pack was here not just for Kael, but for the bond they'd forged. the mark that tied her to him. Kael's body was tense, his wounds still seeping blood. But his stance was unyielding, an alpha facing his past. The air in the clearing thrummed with power, the ancient stones radiating a warmth that kept the snow from settling on them. Elara felt it through the bond of magic older than the forest, tying Kael to this place, to his kind. What are these stones? She whispered, her breath clouding in the cold. Sacred ground, Kael said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the shadows. The pack's heart. It's where we were born, where we're bound. They can't kill me here, not without breaking the old laws. But they'll try. Her heart clenched. And me? His gaze met hers, fierce and protective. They won't touch you. I'll make sure of it. Before she could respond, a figure stepped from the trees, a massive wolf, its fur silver gray, its eyes a burning red that cut through the dark. It shifted, its form blurring until a man stood in its place, tall and broad, his face scarred and hard. His presence was commanding, but it lacked Kael's warmth, his humanity. Kael, the man said, his voice a low growl. You've brought a human to our sacred ground. You've marked her. You dare defy us again? Kael stepped forward, shielding Elara. Ragnar, he said, his voice steady but laced with venom. I left your pack. I'm not yours to command anymore. Ragnar's lips curled into a sneer. You were never one of us, not after you let her die. And now you drag this human into our world? She's a threat. The mark makes her one of us, and we don't accept outsiders. Elara's pulse raced, the bond flaring with Kael's anger. She's my mate, Kael said, the word a challenge, a declaration. And the mark is my claim. You touch her, you answer to me. Ragnar laughed, a cold, bitter sound, and more wolves emerged from the trees, their eyes glowing, their growls low and menacing. Elara's grip tightened on her knife, her fear battling the resolve she felt through the bond. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Kael, for the life they could have. You can't protect her, Ragnar said, stepping closer. You couldn't protect Lila. What makes you think you can save this one? The name hit Kael like a blow, and Elara felt his pain through the bond, sharp, raw, a wound that hadn't healed. Lila, the woman he'd lost, the reason he'd run. She reached for his hand, squeezing it, grounding him. You're not that man anymore, she whispered, her voice fierce. You're stronger now. We're stronger. Kael's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world stilled. The bond pulsed, carrying her strength to him, her belief in him. He nodded, his jaw tightening, and turned back to Ragnar. This ends tonight, he said. You want me? Fight me, alone. Leave her out of it. Ragnar's eyes narrowed, and the pack growled, their hackles rising. A challenge? He said, his voice mocking. You're no alpha anymore, Kael, but I'll humor you. One fight. If you win, we leave. If you lose, she dies with you. Elara's heart stopped, but Kael didn't hesitate. Deal, he said, his voice cold, final. No. Elara grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. Kael, you're hurt. You can't. I have to, he said, turning to her, his eyes soft but unyielding. This is my fight, Elara, my past. But I'm doing it for us. For you. Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded, the bond flooding with her love, her fear, her trust. Come back to me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Always, he said, brushing his thumb across her cheek, the touch a promise. Then he turned, stripping off his torn jacket, his body already shifting, muscles rippling as fur sprouted, his form blurring into that of a massive wolf black as night, with amber eyes that burned with determination. Ragnar shifted too, his silver-gray wolf larger, more scarred, but Kael didn't flinch. They circled, growls rumbling, and then they clashed, a storm of teeth and claws. Elara's heart pounded, her hand clutching the knife, the bond screaming with Kael's pain and fury. The pack watched, their eyes glowing, but they didn't move. The sacred ground held them back. Just as Kael had said, the fight was brutal, blood staining the snow, but Kael fought with a ferocity that took her breath away. He was fighting for her, for them, and she felt it through the bond, a love so fierce it could shatter mountains. Ragnar lunged, his jaws snapping, but Kael was faster, dodging and striking, his claws tearing into Ragnar's flank. The pack howled, their voices rising, and Elara realized this wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. Kael landed a final blow, pinning Ragnar to the ground, his jaws at the other wolf's throat. Yield, he growled, his voice echoing through the bond, raw and commanding. Ragnar snarled but went limp, his eyes dimming. The pack fell silent, their heads bowing, and Elara felt a shift in the air, a release of tension. Kael had won. He shifted back, human again, bloodied but standing, his chest heaving as he turned to her. She ran to him, throwing her arms around him, heedless of the blood, the cold, the pack watching. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're okay." He held her tightly, his breath warm against her hair. "I told you," he said, his voice rough. "Always." But as the pack retreated into the trees, their eyes still glowing, Elara knew this wasn't the end. The bond pulsed, warning her that their fight was far from over. Chapter 11. Resolution. Clearing was silent now. The pack's glowing eyes fading into the dark as they retreated, their howls swallowed by the storm. The ancient stones stood sentinel, their faint glow a reminder of the magic that had held them at bay. Elara clung to Kael, her arms wrapped around him, her face pressed against his chest. His heartbeat was strong under her cheek, a steady rhythm that anchored her despite the blood and snow clinging to him. The bond between them pulsed, warm and alive, carrying his relief, his exhaustion, and a love so fierce it made her tremble. He'd fought for her, for them, and won, but the weight of what came next hung heavy in the air. Kael's arms tightened around her, his breath ragged but warm against her hair. "It's over," he murmured, though his voice held a note of uncertainty, as if he didn't quite believe it. "For now." Elara pulled back, searching his face. His amber eyes were softer now, the wild edge tempered. But the cuts on his chest and face were still raw, blood mixing with the melting snow. "You're hurt," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We need to get you cleaned up." He shook his head, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "I'll heal," he said, his voice low, rough. "You're the one I'm worried about." "You shouldn't have had to see that." She leaned into his touch, the bond flaring with her resolve. "I chose this, Kael. I chose you. And I'd do it again." His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, she saw the weight of his past, the guilt over Leela, the years of running, the fear of dragging her into his world. But then he smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips that made her heart stutter. "You're impossible," he said, echoing her words from days ago. And the warmth in his voice chased away the cold. They made their way back to the cabin, leaning on each other, the storm quieter now, as if the forest itself had exhaled. The bond hummed, a constant reminder of their connection, and Elara felt it deeper than ever, his strength, his pain, and the love that bound them. The cabin was a wreck, glass scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, but it was still a refuge. She helped Kael inside, guiding him to the couch, and grabbed the first aid kit, her hands steadier now, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. As she cleaned his wounds, her fingers gentle on his torn skin. Kael watched her, his gaze soft but intense. "You're good at this," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "Taking care of people." She smiled, taping a bandage over his chest. "I've had practice. Not usually on werewolves though." He chuckled, a low, rough sound that warmed the room. "First time for everything." The silence that followed was comfortable, the bond weaving a quiet intimacy between them. Elara sat back, her hands resting in her lap, and looked at him, really looked. The man who'd saved her, who'd fought for her, who'd bared his soul and his secrets. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. "The pack, they'll come back, won't they?" Kael's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "They might," he admitted. "Ragnar's pride is wounded, but he's not stupid. The sacred ground held them tonight, but they'll regroup. They don't forgive deserters. Or mates." Her heart skipped at the word mates. It still felt surreal, but the bond confirmed it, a truth written in her blood. "So we run?" she asked, though the thought made her chest ache. She'd come to Blackthorn Hollow to stop running, to build a life. But for Kael, she'd go anywhere. He shook his head, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. "No more running," he said, his voice firm. "I'm done with that. We make a stand here, together. Or we find a new place, one where the pack can't touch us. But whatever we do, it's you and me." The words settled over her, a promise that felt like home. She squeezed his hand, the bond pulsing with her love, her trust. "You and me," she echoed, and the weight of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. "But what about the pack? The magic? You said the mark ties me to you, but what does that mean for me?" Kael's expression softened, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. "The mark protects you," he said. But it's more than that. You're part of my world now. You might feel things. The forest, the moon, the pack. It's in your blood through me. Her breath caught, the implications sinking in. Will I change? The question hung between them, heavy with fear and curiosity. He hesitated, his thumb brushing over her palm where the mark lay. I don't know, he admitted. The bond is rare, even among shifters. Humans don't usually survive it. But you're different, stronger. She nodded, swallowing the fear. Whatever came next, she'd face it with him. Then we figure it out, she said, her voice steady. Together, Kael pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and she melted into him, the bond singing with their shared resolve. Outside, the storm had calmed, the forest quiet, but Elara knew it was only a pause. The pack was still out there, and the magic in her blood was a mystery yet to unfold. But for now, she had Kael. And that was enough. As they sat by the fire, their hands entwined, Elara felt a new chapter beginning, not just for them, but for the life they'd build. No matter what came next. Chapter 12. Outgrowth. Fire in the cabin crackled softly, its glow casting a warm halo over Elara and Kael as they sat entwined on the couch. Their hands still clasped, the blood mark on her palm a quiet pulse of their bond. The storm outside had settled into a gentle snowfall, the forest hushed, as if granting them a moment of peace after the chaos. Elara's head rested against Kael's shoulder, his warmth seeping into her, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. The bond hummed between them, a steady current of love, trust, and the unspoken promise of a future they'd fight for. But beneath it, a thread of suspense lingered, questions about the pack, the magic in her blood, and what it meant to be Kael's mate in a world ruled by primal instincts. Kael's fingers traced lazy circles on her hand, his touch gentle, despite the strength in his grip. His wounds were already healing, the cuts on his chest and face fading to faint lines, a reminder of his shifter nature. Elara marveled at it, but also at the man beneath, the one who'd bared his soul, who'd fought for her, who'd chosen her despite his fear of losing someone again. She tilted her head to look at him, his amber eyes soft in the firelight, and felt a swell of emotion she couldn't contain. You're staring, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, his voice low and warm. Can you blame me? She replied, her tone light, but her eyes serious. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this. You, werewolves, magic, me, in the middle of it. He chuckled, the sound rough but genuine, and it warmed her more than the fire. You're handling it better than I did, he said. The first time I shifted, I thought I'd lost my mind. She raised an eyebrow, leaning back to study him. When was that? You said you were born here, in the forest. Did you always know what you were? His smile faded, and the bond carried a flicker of old pain. I was young, he said, his voice quieter now. 10, maybe 11. The pack raised me, taught me the old ways, the moon, the blood, the bond to the forest. But it's not a gentle world. You learn fast, or you don't survive. Elara's heart ached for the boy he'd been, thrust into a life of claws and instinct. She squeezed his hand, the bond pulsing with her empathy. And Leela? She asked softly, testing the name, knowing it carried weight. Kael's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. She was my mate, he said, the words heavy but honest. Or I thought she was. The bond was different, then less certain. She died because I wasn't strong enough to protect her from Ragnar's ambition. I've carried that ever since. Elara nodded, her throat tight. I'm not her, she said, her voice firm but gentle. And you're not that man anymore. You proved that tonight. His eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, and the bond flared with his gratitude, his love. You make me want to believe that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You make me want to be better. She smiled, her heart swelling. You already are. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire's crackle mingling with the soft patter of snow against the broken window. Elara felt the bond deepen, a quiet certainty settling between them. But the questions lingered. What did the mark mean for her? Would she change, as Kael had hinted? And the pack. Ragnar's retreat felt temporary, a pause before the next strike. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the man beside her, the warmth of his presence. What do we do now? She asked, her voice soft. Stay here? Fight? Find somewhere new? Kael leaned back, his arm tightening around her. We could stay, he said. The cabin's yours, and the sacred ground gives us leverage. The pack won't cross it lightly, not after tonight. But it won't be easy. They'll test us, especially with the mark tying you to me. And if we leave? She asked, her curiosity tinged with fear. He hesitated, his eyes distant. There are places, other territories, beyond the pack's reach. But it means starting over, away from the forest, the magic. I'd do it for you. But it's your call, Elara. This is your home too. The weight of the choice settled over her, but it didn't feel heavy, not with Kael beside her. She'd come to Blackthorn Hollow to escape, to rebuild, but she'd found something more, a life, a love, a purpose. I want to stay, she said, her voice steady. This is my home now. With you. Kael's eyes softened, and he pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. Then we stay, he said, his voice a vow. We make this ours. No matter what comes, the bond sang, a warmth that chased away the last of her doubts. Outside, the forest was quiet, the snow falling gently, blanketing the scars of the fight. But Elara knew the peace was fragile. The pack was out there, and the magic in her blood was a mystery yet to unfold. Whatever lay ahead, whether it was Ragnar's return or the changes the bond might bring, she'd face it with Kael. Their love, a fire that could burn through any storm. As the fire died to embers, Elara nestled closer to Kael, her head on his chest, his heartbeat a steady promise. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. She was home. Chapter 13. A new Daunt cabin was a haven of quiet warmth. The fire's embers casting a soft glow over Elara and Kael as they lay entwined on the couch, the blanket draped loosely over them. The storm had passed, leaving a stillness that felt like a gift after the chaos of the night. Elara's head rested on Kael's chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear, the bond between them a living pulse that wove their emotions together, love, trust, and a shared resolve to face whatever came next. The blood mark on her palm tingled faintly, a reminder of the magic that tied her to him, to this world of shifters and ancient secrets. But the peace was fragile, and beneath the warmth, a thread of suspense lingered. Ragnar's pack was still out there, and the mystery of what the mark might awaken in her remained unanswered. Kael's fingers traced the curve of her shoulder, his touch gentle but grounding, as if he needed to reassure himself she was real. His wounds had healed to faint scars, a testament to his shifter nature, but his eyes held a vulnerability that made her heart ache. You're awake, he murmured, his voice low, rough with sleep. Barely, she said, tilting her head to meet his gaze. His amber eyes were soft in the dim light, but there was a weight in them, a quiet fear she felt through the bond. You're thinking too much, he chuckled, the sound warming her more than the fire ever could. Can't help it, he said. You're here, in my world, and I keep waiting for you to realize you deserve better. She propped herself up, her hand resting on his chest, the bond flaring with her indignation. Don't, she said, her voice firm but soft. I chose you, Kael. I'm not going anywhere. His eyes searched hers, and the bond carried his emotions, love, gratitude, and a flicker of guilt that hadn't fully faded. I know, he said, his hand covering hers, his thumb brushing over the mark. But this life, it's not easy. The pack, the magic, what it might do to you. I'd give anything to keep you safe from it. Elara leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. I'm not afraid, she said, and for the first time, she meant it. The bond hummed, carrying her certainty, her love. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what mates do, right? He smiled, a real smile that lit up his face, and pulled her closer, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was soft, reverent, but laced with the fire of their bond. Right, he whispered, the word a promise that settled deep in her soul. They rose as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the broken window, painting the snow outside in hues of gold and pink. The cabin was a mess, glass scattered, furniture askew, but it felt like theirs, a sanctuary forged in blood and love. Elara moved to the kitchen, brewing coffee while Kael patched the window with a board, his movements sure despite the lingering pain she felt through the bond. They worked in quiet harmony, the bond weaving a rhythm between them. A silent conversation of glances and touches. As they sat with their coffee, the steam curling in the cool air, Elara felt a shift inside her, a warmth that wasn't just the bond, but something deeper, wilder. She flexed her hand, the mark tingling, and caught Kael watching her, his expression unreadable. What is it? She asked, her voice quiet. He set his mug down, his eyes narrowing. The mark, he said. It's active. More than it should be. Her heart skipped, the suspense of what it meant tightening her chest. Active how? Am I changing? Kael reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. Maybe, he said, his voice careful. The bond is rare, Elara. Humans don't usually carry it. You might feel the forest, the moon like I do. Or, he hesitated, his eyes darkening. You might shift. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Elara's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Would that be so bad? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. To be like you? His jaw tightened, and the bond carried his fear, his love. It's not about being bad, he said. It's about losing you. The shift, it's not gentle. And if it happens, the pack will see you as one of us. A threat. She squeezed his hand, her resolve unwavering. Then we face them, she said. Like we did last night, together. Before Kael could respond, a distant howl pierced the morning, softer than before but unmistakable. They both froze, the bond flaring with shared alertness. Kael stood, moving to the window, his body tense. They're back, he said, his voice grim. But they're not attacking. Not yet. Elara joined him, peering out at the snow-dusted forest. A single wolf stood at the edge of the trees, its first silver-gray Ragnar. But he didn't advance, his eyes fixed on the cabin, almost waiting. What does he want? She asked, her voice low. Kael's hand found hers, the bond steadying them both. A truce, he said, or a challenge. Either way, we're ready. They stepped outside, hand in hand, the cold biting but the bond warming them. Ragnar shifted, his human form scarred but less menacing in the daylight. You've won your stand, Kael, he said, his voice grudging. The pack respects strength. The human, she's yours. But the forest watches, always. Kael's grip tightened, his voice steady. We're staying. This is our home now. Ragnar nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes, and turned, disappearing into the trees. The forest was silent, the tension easing. And Elara felt the bond pulse with a new certainty, a future. Here, with Kael, they returned to the cabin, the dawn light spilling over them, and as Kael pulled her close, Elara knew they'd face whatever came next pack. Magic, or the wildness in her blood together. Their love a fire that would never fade.